Hello and welcome to Mastering Dungeons. I am your host, Sean Merwin, here with my co-host, as always, the solar-powered Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos, what's going on?
Hey, Sean. Indeed, today's the day that I'm getting solar installed on my roof, and I'm very excited about it.
And you're back?
And it's not on my back. I'm trying to get them to install a port in me so that I can get charged by the panels as well, but I think it's just going to have to be caffeine. So
yeah, it'll save you on coffee costs.
Yeah,
and the like.
Maybe I could warm my coffee.
There you go. So with that bit of nonsense out of the way, let's dig right in to the D&D news for the week. We're going to start with D&D Celebration. They have released the packages that you can purchase to enjoy D&D Celebration in a big way. For those of you who don't know, D&D Celebration is taking place September 24th through 26th. And there are two packages that they have put up, one at the $500 level and one at the $110 level, each giving you advanced registration codes to get your D&D Celebration registration done early, a Witchlight t-shirt, a golden ticket, and a 12-page Heroes Feast cook booklet. For the $110 package, you also get a double-sided playmat. So what's your take on this?
I mean, one of the questions that I had was, all right, advanced registration code. Do you normally pay for D&D Celebration? How much is it? I don't know. I'd like to know. But I guess the idea is that you will get to do things like sign up for the Epic or whatever special event there is first. So that can be useful. A piece of a book. I don't know that I'm super excited about the Heroes Feast cook booklet versus whatever the book is. You know, there's a lot of not information here. And a person like me who's detail oriented, it all drives me bonkers. But what I do know is that double-sided playmat looks super sweet. I'm going with the Beetle and Grimm's version, so I imagine it's going to have some pretty neat maps. But that double-sided playmat that has the carnival on one side and the sort of Fey domain on the other, that's super neat, and I could see that bringing in a lot of people in. It looked like it had sold out 2 hours in, but I think they were trying to fix a thing with the codes. And so both these are still available at the time of this recording, though they say, that they have short quantities and they're selling out. Act quickly if you want these things.
Yep, and we will keep an eye on registration to let you know what exactly it is you might be registering for, because just to sort out some things here, this is D&D Celebration, as opposed to the D&D Live, where there is no gameplay for just the viewers to do. You're just watching news and watching other people stream, as opposed to the D&D weekends, virtual weekends,
right, where
it's only signing up to play and there's no other marketing stuff involved. Or,
and it's a bit
streams.
It's a bit confusing because last year there was play during D&D Live, and the year before that it also. So D&D Live is usually the star-studded place where we watch. And this year it happened, right? We watched famous people play D&D, but when it happened physically in LA the last year before COVID, there were also games there. D&D Celebration is after the adventure is released or as it's releasing, and sort of celebrating D&D and the fact that this storyline is out. So it'll be around the time the Witchlight's coming out, and that's the time that you're enjoying it. And I guess then getting a taste of it, because there'll probably be organized play adventures that are around the Witchlight theme, maybe an intro, something like that, maybe an epic. And that gives people the opportunity to have these neat experiences in the world of Witchlight, maybe before you've even looked at the book.
There you go. The ENnie Awards have been announced. The ENnies, for those of you who don't know, is a long-running organization tied to World that recognize products released over the past year from 1 April to the next. People have different opinions on awards and award shows and what these awards mean. I've made mine clear, I know, in shows from from 2 years ago. It's all.
Yeah.
So I'm going to step aside and let Teos give his thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think I've shared my take on it too. But in general, it's a bit of a strange format. Judges cannot be involved in the industry. So it's a little strange. I guess the idea is to eliminate bias, but what that's often meant is it's paved the way for, or freed up the ability for organizations to get fans that are in their corner to apply as judges, because they don't need to be in the industry. They're just fans. And now they can vote for or nominate the products that they like. And so there have been a number of accusations across many, many years of specific companies doing this and padding the judges. ENnie seems to be aware of that and is trying to improve that. So step one is the judges. Step two is the judges read a ton of material. It's a lot of work for these judges. And so thank you to the judges who are not there for biased reasons and who are there for reviewing things, because it's a ton of work to look over these. And I know some of the judges from past years that are good people who have done this work. It's an immense amount to look at all these different submissions they receive. And then they come up with a list of nominees. And those nominees then eventually will be voted on by fans, which is a bit strange because you sort of have this sort of expert judgment that then is destroyed by fans who may or may not pick the best product. They may just pick what they like. And so we've had years where like Paizo would win every single award ever because all the Paizo fans would just show up in droves and champion it. Or we've had, years when other products that were really had some issues to them, but they would win all kinds of awards because of this sort of same treatment. Lately, what we've seen is that big companies don't submit products to the ENnies. They either have issues with the ENnies or they feel like it's a situation where other companies should shine. And so they deliberately don't introduce the material. So this year, a lot of the major companies, you won't see their products in this nominee list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this year, we see a lot from Cortex and from the Sentinel Comics RPG. A lot of Free League products have been nominated. James Introcasso's My Dad's Monster Manual has been nominated in the Best Monster category.
That's pretty fun.
Way to go, James. You can see the whole list of ENnie nominations on ENnie-awards.com.
And, I couldn't help but think that My Dad's Monster Manual might be like the last, if not, it's one of the most recent DMs Guild Adept releases.
True.
Which is kind of amazing because that was released a long time ago.
Yeah, a year or so ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Podjam 2021 was this weekend, raising funds for the Trevor Project while providing a number of streamed seminars on the topic of podcasting.
What is that?
Podjam.
What's
that?
What's podcasting?
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Okay.
So you can go to penwitchstudio.com/podjam to check out more about this information if you're interested in podcasting or considering doing a podcast.
Yeah, I watched some of it. I haven't been able to watch all of it, but what I did see was really cool. So I'm looking forward to seeing more, especially some of the topics on marketing and things like that seemed interesting.
Yeah. A bit of sad news in the industry. Steve Perrin has passed away. If you don't know who Steve was, he was a legend in the role-playing game field, helping found organizations as diverse as the SCA. He wrote the game RuneQuest back in the day, one of the early employees at Chaosium. So, Call of Cthulhu, that rule set, which is now the basic role-playing game rule set that many different games work on. He was involved in, and he was also involved in early Dungeons and Dragons. He published his house rules in 1976, which became influential with players at the time. Before my time, but I know that a lot of people that were playing from the beginning have fond memories of his involvement and pulled a lot of his content and his thoughts on rules and game design into their own games.
Yeah, and folks who are interested, you can look up, DM David talks about this, John Peterson, other areas you can find on the web that will talk about this era when D&D was, sort of flying off the shelves in this old original Dungeons and Dragons form. And people would try to interpret these rules because they were quite bizarre. And they would come up with different ways to do them. and they would be sort of local. This is a pre-internet world, so they're sort of local areas. In the San Francisco area, Steve Perrin is kind of coming up with ideas on how to handle initiative and things that are a little bit like skills, and basically trying to make the game more robust. And this happens even as AD&D comes out. But the Perrin conventions, as they're called, that he wrote up, were hugely influential because tons and tons of people were using them, and they'd end up in magazines and trade write-ups. And so the whole of D&D was sort of heavily influenced by what he put together, which is crazy to think about your house rules,
right,
changing the game like that. But it really is something that he managed to do, which is cool.
Absolutely. And he worked right up until the time of his death on various projects throughout the game industry. So,
yeah, and he worked on all kinds of supplements. He wrote Under Illithorn. He wrote one of the Red Wizards of Thay box sets. A number of interesting pieces. And RuneQuest and the SCA. just
the Society for Creative Anachronism.
That's all.
Which has tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people who enjoy that hobby. So, we will honor his passing. And for all you rules lawyers out there, be careful, because D&D is about to get nerfed, you power gamers. No, we're not talking about the rules being nerfed. We're talking about the actual nerf guns. So now we have foam firing gun toys. And, who owns Nerf?
It's Hasbro.
Wow, imagine that. Well, what could you do with that? Oh, you could make D&D branded Nerf guns. And that is just what's happened. You want to share all the exciting news for
you've got 3 models. You have the this Dragon Power series, as it's known, includes a bow, the Skyblaze dart bow, a repeating gun made to look like a dragon breathing fire called Ember Strike, and a pistol called Fire Shot. They all carry the D&D brand. You can find them at Target and all sorts of places like that. So if you enjoy shooting people in the head with foam darts, as I often have, this is a nice way to do it.
There you go. We talked about Evil Hat recently for sharing some information on their publishing house, and they've provided even more information recently. So in 2014, Evil Hat, who publishes Fate and other RPGs, shared on their blog the costs that they were incurring by publishing their role-playing games. Everything from art to editing to layout, including shipping and printing, things that, even if you're in the industry as a designer, you might not know a lot about. Well, that was pretty groundbreaking in 2014 when they put that up, and they've updated that information for 2021. And I will let Teos take it from here.
Sure. So they one of the neat things about this article is that it really is an update. Like they write it in like colored text, sort of like, update for 2021. So you get to see what they had in their old article 7 years ago and what they have now. And so, back in 2014, they had the high end for writing is starting at 5 cents a word and the low at 3 cents a word. And now they say you really shouldn't be paying below 5 cents, and the higher rates are above 10 cents. And, as we know, companies like MCDM are paying 20 cents. And so it's even this is a little bit, I could use almost an update, but I think that in general, Evil Hat is a small company. They are trying very carefully to control their costs, as many small companies do. So it's written from that perspective. But it is helpful, if you're thinking of things like, okay, I want to hire someone for layout, or I want to print some books. What could that cost me? This article is a great reference that shows you how it's changed over time. Or if you work on these things, you can see what companies are paying. And with the knowledge that it can be higher in costs for some companies. Some companies do pay more than what you'll see on this article.
Mm-hmm. And you can find that at www.deadlyfriendly.com. The Yawning Portal site is now telling us all about the Adventures League Mist Hunters campaign. So we've seen some adventures released, but we haven't gotten the full rundown, and now we have. So this includes rules, the upcoming release schedule, downloads, including things like character sheets, and the character creation information. And this is great for me, this is something that Wizards as a whole, not just the Adventures League, but Wizards should be pushing harder to market, because it's a limited run campaign. I think they're going to end up being 14 adventures in the whole series. And, this is something where people out there who are like, oh boy, I would really love to play D&D, but I don't know how. I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
This should be on the front page of the whole Wizards of the Coast site, and it's not. It's, it's still hidden in the Adventures League section. And I can understand that the Adventures League can be a different animal than a regular D&D game. And sometimes, it does have its own baggage.
Yeah.
And I can see that there would be some players that I wouldn't want to push in that direction because of the complexity of it, because of, for a lot of reasons. But this is one of those things where here are some play opportunities that anyone can get into. It can be done pretty easily, with less difficulty than a normal big organized play campaign. And this should be being pushed.
I also think that if they could find a way to give stores a few download codes for the DM's Guild adventures that count as sales, right? So Wizards is paying, so generate sales for the authors, and the stores could get these copies, would be fantastic, because stores used to get kits for things like D&D encounters, and even early AL. And it made a big difference to have that stream of communication going out to every store saying, hey, here's this exciting thing. Here's something your players can jump into. And this is the kind of program that would be fantastic for this, right? You would see some real excitement around this. And you'd see stores start to organize around this because it's an easy program to run, and it's more story heavy. So you don't need people who are super into the rules to be able to do it. It's new player friendly, and it's very thematic with this whole recent book. Van Richten's is on their shelves at pretty much any store out there. It'd be great.
Yeah. And this is a step in the right direction, which is better than we've seen at some point. You can see that Chris Tulloch and Chris Lindsay are sort of working together, and they've each been in charge of the organized play part of Wizards for a bit in the D&D side. So, seeing them come together and learn the lessons they've learned each individually can come together to build this. I would love to see something like this, but it may be only 4 adventures, and then have it be done, just to get to those people that can focus for 4 sessions and then they sort of lose interest. To get them through something to the end, I think is important. But I'm going to try to run this. I've played the first adventure with you online, but this is something that the limited scope of it, I think is a huge draw.
Yeah.
For both existing players and new players.
Agreed.
With that, we will move on to DM David. Speaking of David Hartledge, he has an article on something we talked about last week, which is confidence and faking it. We said if you are a DM, you should not worry about getting things wrong. You should just go in guns blazing and have fun and do your thing, and then reflect later on how it went. But while you're doing it, just go. And, DM David discusses this in his latest article, Confidence, why faking confidence makes you a better dungeon master.
Yeah, it's a nice short read, and just really it's about that sort of high level. It's not one of those articles that's full of tips, detailed things. It really is this, just go for it and just do it. And you don't have to achieve complete mastery to have that confidence. You can just portray it. You can just be emphatic and say, we'll look that roll up later. Let's keep going. Here's what we're going to do in this case. And it works just great.
Yep. I mean, and what do players want? A, they want a game, and B, they want to feel safe within the game, and C, they want to think that the person running them through the game knows what they're doing. And if you look like you know what you're doing, the players are going to feel like you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And they're going to enjoy the game for it. So
yeah.
check that out at dmdavid.com. So, with news safely out of the way, we will now go into part 2 of our 2 billion part series, or maybe less, on running and designing intro adventures. So last week we covered important considerations for new DMs running games for the first time, or a DM deciding how to handle running games for new players. So last week we covered things like setting up the session, what to tell the players, how to manage their expectations, what you should be thinking about as the DM. And then we addressed the old, do we do character creation or do we use pre-gens discussion for new players? So with that out of the way, now we're going to move on to the next big question, which is, what should we be running for these new players or as a new DM? And
that's a tough question, right? I mean, if you just step back and imagine you're a brand new DM, you go into a gaming store, whether it's, it could be a Target, it could be a hobby shop, it could be a lot of things, it could be Amazon, and you're looking at all these offerings. Does anything immediately say, start here? No, right?
Not really.
It's a tough question.
Yeah. Even the box sets don't really say start here, right? They say the essentials kit and they say these things, but they don't really say, hey, brand new, right here.
And you could even see the word start in starter set, but also Stranger Things starter set. And then the Dragons of Ice Spear Peak Essentials kit feels like a starter set.
Right.
I'm confused.
Not to mention Rick and Morty box set, right?
Yeah.
So there's all of those things. And if you ask someone, hey, you're experienced playing D&D, what should I start with? You're going to get, like as I asked on Twitter, you're going to get hundreds of different answers.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to break down some of those choices you might have and then talk about what makes for a good opening session adventure. So as we mentioned, there are literally infinite choices for what you can run, because in addition to the tens of thousands of products you can choose from in stores on the DMs Guild all over the place, you could also make your own. So there, you're talking an infinite amount. So when I asked on Twitter what people would suggest for a new DM to run, there were 2 overwhelming favorites, and neither are really surprises. There's the D&D Beginner Box, which includes the Lost Mines of Phandelver adventure, and the D&D Essentials Kit, which contains the Dragon of Icespire Peak adventure. I also got some suggestions to use the 1 Hour Adventurers League intro adventures that they put out at the start of every season. What I was surprised to see is that almost no one suggested any of the hardcover adventures for beginner DMs. I was not surprised that no one suggested it, because I understand why, but with all the other things flying around, I was surprised that wasn't more of a discussion.
It's super interesting because all these adventures make a point to start at level 1. So in theory, shouldn't they all be good for new DMs? And yet we all know the answer to that one.
Yeah, they're really not, because of the length of the campaign that follows, generally speaking.
Well, and just even the premise, and it's not just, old folks like us that have some biased critical look at, what an adventure is. It's really interesting to hear people who come with a new voice, and they'll have a video out there where they'll say, I really loved the theme of Tomb of Annihilation, and then only as I started to work with it did I realize this and that and the other and all these problems, and that actually I don't really want to murder all of my players' characters off, and it's just it's really hard to choose the right start.
Yep. So all of these that we've mentioned can be a good place to start, but each has some pros and cons that we'll look at and discuss throughout the rest of this episode. Now, before we do any of this, we need to acknowledge that the nature of D&D means that there's different DMing sensibilities, different desires from players, different player types. So we may give a pro for one box and a con for a box, and you may say, well, that con is my pro, and I would say I'm sure you're right, but you may not be the typical player DM. So just keep that in mind as we discuss these. So let's start with where it all started: Lost Mines of Phandelver in the D&D beginner box. In this adventure, you get pre-generated characters, and you start off with a goal, essentially, with a task, and that task sends you toward the town of Phandalin, and then the hijinks commence from there. So let's talk about some pros and cons. The one pro I already mentioned. It includes pre-generated characters that are at least somewhat tied to the setting.
Yeah, it's nice, right? Their backgrounds, ideals, all of that have ties to the town that they're in, and the major agents at the beginning of the adventure. Is cool.
Yep. So that is good if you choose to go the pre-generated character route. You have those at your disposal. They're pretty easy to understand and to use. And that can grease the skids for new players in getting into the character that they're going to be playing. Any other pros that you wanted to mention?
No, I think that's that. The box does. I don't know if we mentioned this. I missed this, but the box comes with a basic form of the rules, right? Which is nice too. So you don't need anything other than this box. You've got the dice. You've got the pre-gens. You kind of have everything you need, and don't have to buy more if you don't want to.
Yep, and for leveling, that's given right in the character sheets and in those rules as well. So it explains things relatively easily when you do advance and level. Another pro I would say is that there is a full story involved in this adventure. You can see the seeds of the ending of the adventure in the beginning of the adventure. So if you are a type of DM or a type of player, or you have the types of players that want to go on like this longer, grand, heroic quest, it's all right there for you. You don't have to add too much to it to get to that point.
Yeah.
So overall, many people cut their teeth on 5th edition with this box set, and most of the time people had mostly good things to say about it, which should tell you that it's a strong contender for the best way to start an adventure.
I mean, I would be a little harsher on it in that I would say it's reasonable, but I think one of the reasons we're having this conversation is that it is not some, oh yeah, if you're ever writing a starter set or an intro adventure, here, just 100% copy this.
Right.
No, it works well, but man, it could be better. Right. And
yes. Oh, for sure. And that's why we're having this discussion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if you are like going to create your own, here are the good things from it. Now let's talk about the things that could be improved upon.
So I'll start with one that I think of about almost every single D&D convention experience where new players are treated. And that is, you give the fighter their character sheet. Cool. You give the rogue their character sheet. Great. You give the wizard their character sheet. And they go, great. How do all these spells work? Oh, hold on. Let me grab my player's handbook, right? Nothing ever breaks down spells and spellcasting for brand new players that just got a pregen. And it's the same thing here. And it's the same thing in every one of these things. There isn't anything that says, hey, those spells, here's how they work. Here's the shortcut version. Here's the one pager that walks you through your spells. And that is a major thing that every convention intro game should have, and every product like this should have, and you don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah. And sure, they have the rule book and you could hand them the rule book, but if they're flipping from magic missile to, this to that, having everything right on one page and making a simplified version of it is, as Teos said, it's imperative that you do that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the people that are excited to play the spellcaster suddenly aren't so excited to play the spellcaster anymore when they have to do all of this flipping, and there's so much text to pour through, and so many the minor rules that can be confusing, they get hit with it right away.
Yep.
Another con is there is a difficult choice for the players in this adventure right from the start. And it happens, we're going to spoil this, but it's been around forever. So Here we go. There's a goblin ambush. And at the end of the ambush, the characters essentially have a choice to either go to the goblin lair or go to town.
Yeah.
And that is a major choice to make for players that probably don't know the consequences of those choices. So if they go to town right away, they lose the thread of what's going on, because now they're in town. Now they start dealing with the problems in town and the NPCs in town. And we need to get lodging. How do we do that? And, a different part of the game then kicks in before they've really gotten into the heart of what this adventure is about, which is finding the people that hired them in the first place to come to town.
Yeah, absolutely. And we could have a show on choices. And I've been writing about choices on the blog. And this is the thing that sort of kills me when you have to wonder, why is this choice here? And if it is, why doesn't it come with all the information that it should have? And those are the kind of things that as a DM, you can really get derailed, right? Because as a DM, you might read this and think, well, okay, and then we're going to go to the goblin ambush, because that's clearly how this adventure is laid out, or to the goblin lair. And then your players go to town. And you might not even prep the town. And so now you're like, you're floundering. And that's the worst. You never want your DM on an intro adventure to be unprepared, right?
Right.
Oh, so bad.
Yep. And it's very simple to add details that incentivize players to do a thing. You can still give them a choice, but you can make the choice very obvious of which one is right. The goblin ambush, I had to recheck. It does say that this caravan, this wagon that was used in the ambush, that was ambushed earlier, belonged to the Rockseeker dwarf who hired you. And if you highlight that, if you say, there's blood, there's obvious drag marks where the goblins have dragged human-sized people away toward the mountain, then there were signs of struggle along the way. Then it becomes clear that these people may be in danger right now.
Right. They're alive.
We need to go that way. And otherwise, especially if this first encounter really messes up the characters, which we'll talk about the swinginess of first level character combats later. But, if that really messes them up, they may be incentivized to rest, to go to town, to heal, because, if these 3 or 4 goblins did this to us, if there's a whole layer of them, we don't stand a chance.
And I think that's something that, we've seen a lot from running countless adventures in organized play, right? When you run adventure after adventure after adventure for all kinds of different players, you see these kinds of issues and you learn to recognize, and hopefully when you and I write things, we do less of that, because we've seen so many times where these kinds of things throw players off, right? The lack of clarity. And it can seem like, well, I don't need to say that, it's obvious. But no, players can come up with all kinds of ideas, and the tiniest little bit of information can throw the whole group into a, let's rest for the night kind of thing. And so if you want your players to go on a rescue, you need to tell them that. You really do. You can make it seem like they came up with it. And what's funny about it is a very little bit of information, but strong information, will have that effect of causing the whole group to think they came up with the idea of chasing the goblins. But you are really routing them that way, right? So it doesn't feel like a railroad. It's not like you have to. You want to, and that's important. Yeah.
And to not to get too teacherly, writerly, but one word can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
Right. Saying that there's a trail that the goblins take, saying that there's a bloody trail that the goblins take.
And that they're dragging, something was dragged here.
Right. Right. One word can set off an entirely different process for thinking and acting and making decisions.
There's another, and there's another thing here, which is, if an intro adventure really is going to be an intro adventure, I feel like it should be instructional. And I think there's a worry that older established DMs will frown on that, but I don't think they will. I think generally it's welcome advice, and just having little sidebars or call out boxes that help you with this, that's really important, because the DM often will read the words and not actually know the intent of the adventure around something like what we're talking about. And so if you have a little call back that says, hey, the intent is really for the characters to go to the goblin lair, they may come up with other options. Here's how you can handle that. That's really welcome advice for most DMs, and will really help them understand, tip them off to, this is a great time to have them do skill checks. The best check reveals the following, will reveal clues that tell them that, hey, the people are alive, they're kidnapped, that kind of thing. And that's the kind of thing that makes for great play and makes for a confident DM.
Yep. The next con is, it's a con, but it's a very hard con to get around. And that is the town of Phandalin can be confusing and overwhelming for a new DM. And it's not even a very big town, but there's just a lot of information that's presented as a big lump. So when you are presenting like that first town that the characters come to, that first area that's going to act as their home base, present the information in a way that is digestible by new DMs, in a way that highlights the important things that they need, rather than dumping everything on them all at once.
Yeah, I feel like this is an homage to the towns that appear in adventures like Hamlet in Temple of Elemental Evil, which is great because we all had fun experiences of sort of walking around the town and talking to the various people. But those adventures also had sort of less going on, and it was easier. Some of the experience was just rambling around, and you can do that. But here we have a lot of NPCs, some of which are members of factions, and there are quests throughout, but some quests may be better to do now versus later. And so it gets quite confusing for a DM to know how to orchestrate this experience. And I think that's, again, where if you had these call outs, or if you divided the information up differently, you could make for a better experience, right? So a couple of things that adventurers can do, and if you're writing your adventure, you can do, is create sectors of the town. Like if you had the outer farmland, right, sort of outer farming homes, those could have a couple of clues that point you inwards towards quests. Then you could have the inner areas, which could be sort of some commerce type things, where players can go shopping and gather info, and then actual specific quest locations that can give you those quests, and narrow those down would probably make a better experience. And we'll see later the whole idea of quests being introduced in phases, which is also really good.
Yep. Another thing you can do, and it's similar to what Teos just said, is when they first come into a town, have something happening that they must interact with.
Yeah, good call.
There's a meeting going on at the town square talking about the goblin raids that have been happening, or someone approaches them and said, "We just saw goblins running this way," and so again, that points them back toward what you want them to stay focused on, which is the goblins at this point.
Yeah. Moving past the town, there are some encounters that are surprisingly hard. The green dragon comes to mind. It generally warns you, so this is not a major misstep of the adventure, but there are some places that are, a DM may not know. And again, if they had those call outs that said, this is what the encounter difficulty is likely going to be, then that would be helpful.
Yep, I agree. So now let's move on to the next big box set, the Ice Spire Peak Adventure of the Essentials Kit. So I think what probably Teos and I are going to agree on here is that you can tell lessons were learned.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have a lot more pros than cons in this one. So for the first pro, first of all, let's describe this adventure. This adventure also takes place in Phandalin. So it's got very much the same town, but the town is now presented as a base right from the start, and there is no coming into town on a quest. You are just there. And what's then the focus? What gets people moving? A quest board. Yeah. So that's the first pro. You now as the DM can decide what quests you want to give your players. You can still give them choices. You could put 3 quests or 4 quests or just 1 quest on the board. That lets you prepare for the choices that the characters are going to make and not be surprised, or be less surprised, let's say, because players can do anything, but less surprised when they make their choice.
Yeah, and I like that this adventure starts with a little more guidance, a little more of a, here's the overview, and then here's sort of your role in it. We still have a town full of places to visit, but we have really shrunken down from having quests in all kinds of different places to, there are interesting locations where you can have conversations and maybe buy things and whatever, but you're going to get these quests from Harbin Wester, the quest giver, and they're going to put these out and, slip these things out the door with these set of quests that will get replaced as you do some. It's almost video gamey, but it works great because it allows the DM to control the flow of information. It creates one stable place where the players are going to go to get their next, to do. And that's exactly it. I think some people fault, I don't know how you feel about this, Shawn, but some people fault that this is a bit of a, small quest type doling out that can get a little repetitive or boring, but I don't know if I've found that.
No, I've run both, and a lot depends on your players. And like I said before, if your players want this linear sort of story where you learn about this threat and that threat introduces you to the next threat, then you have to add that to Icespire Peak. But it's easier to add that than to try to deal with a linear adventure when the characters aren't following that line.
Yeah.
So this sort of quest-based, quest board type of adventure lets DMs more easily add their own content if things go wrong. Because if you're in a linear adventure and your players do something strange and they go off in this direction, it's harder to create content that satisfies their thing while getting them back on track. With this quest type of thing, if they, for some reason, are super interested in this NPC that's really nobody interesting, but for some reason they're focusing on it, you can just move a quest over and have that person give the quest, or create your own quest that captures that person's story.
Yeah. One thing that I really like about this adventure as well is there is a joy to the writing and the around the locations that really comes through. It's clever in a compelling, fun way. The kind of thing when you read it as a DM, you're like, oh, I want to run this. Oh, this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
And it's just, I remember reading this. I can think of where I was when I was reading this and just thinking, okay, I still have a lot to learn as an author. Like, here's the kind of adventure, that just says to me, keep going. There are more doors to open and better words and better ways to create fun, because there's some really great fun pieces in all these different quests that will excite a DM to run them.
Yeah. And it gives you the flexibility to build your own story.
Yeah.
Which I think is saying what you're saying, just in a little different way.
Mm-hmm.
Because the dragon, that's the main foe, can be anywhere.
Yeah.
And so you can have the freedom to put the dragon in the path of the characters at any point. Now, you don't want to do that to kill them, right? But like when I was running it for my family, what I did was they went to these mines to strike a deal with these dwarves, And they did. They struck a deal with the dwarves, and the dwarves were like, "Okay, see you later. We're going to go." And they walked. The dwarves left the mine and got eaten by the dragon while the characters watched, and then started sniffing into the cave to see if there's anything else in there.
Oh, that's great.
So you could just do things like that, and you're not destroying the linear story.
Right.
You're building your own story, which is what, in the long run, you probably want to do as a DM anyway, is start creating your own stories.
Yeah. It's also worth noting, since we're talking about adding content, that on D&D Beyond, they kind of worked, I guess, in sort of partnership with D&D to create additional adventures that you can find on D&D Beyond that are also really well regarded. And I think one of the things that some of the people who have played them lament is that they aren't widely available, because they really are very good. And I think, did you write one of them?
I wrote one, James Introcaso wrote one, and Will Doyle wrote one. So they excellent. They extend it through like 10th level if you want to continue the story. But as Teos said, they are only available right now on D&D Beyond. Yeah. If you buy the box set, it comes with a code in the box set that you can get them for free. Right. Or you can buy them on D&D Beyond separately. Another pro that I loved were the quest cards, magic item cards, initiative trackers, those sorts of things, because players love to be handed something for the most part, right? They love to get the handout or the little card that reads over what the quest is. Oh, you found a potion of healing? Here's your potion of healing card with the writing right on it that tells you what it does. And those they're small things, but they can really add ambiance and fun to a game for players. Yeah, and especially younger players, they love to be able to hold things and bring things out and have reminders that are physical. Mm-hmm. One of the cons of Icespire Peak is some of those low-level encounters are really, really hard. And we could probably say this about almost every adventure that has been published, because low-level play is just so hard in general, so swingy. But there are some cases where you look at the monster that's been chosen and you think, it's going to get several rounds of attacks because it has enough hit points to last several rounds. And that's going to really hurt a lot of characters. And so one of the things that happened when it first came out is people, were having these tough experiences going, wow, you should have warned DMs on these encounters that, hey, this is a hard encounter. Here's some ways to handle that. And we don't get that kind of guidance. Yeah. There's a manticore encounter. Yeah. That's particularly vicious. But there was one more thing I was going to say, but I can't remember what it is now. But overall, it's a very good place to start as a new DM. Yeah, it's a really good one. It just needs a little more. This is the way I feel about it. Like, the writing's great, the mechanic of it, how it's all set up is pretty good. If it had a little more guidance, a little more handling, some of these other things we talked about, it would just be a gold level, right? Like, something you would really aspire to look at anytime you were doing something. But it's close. Yeah. One of the places where a lot of people may have started with D&D is the Stranger Things starter set. This is true because Stranger Things came out. It became a phenomenon on Netflix. And since it nostalgically showed, the protagonist playing D&D, and D&D was a central aspect of the show, when the D&D Stranger Things starter set came out, probably a lot of people grabbed that. Yeah. And I'm going to be honest with you, I have not read it. Yeah. So I'm going to turn this over to you. I can talk about it. In fact, when it came out, one of the fun things I did is I sat down with my son and I had him look at the first Lost Mine of Phandelver starter set and the Stranger Things starter set and say, which do you like better? And my son at the time was in middle school, I think. And so, And so he looked at both and how the books are laid out. One interesting thing is the layout is different in various ways. And he preferred the Lost Mine layout. He thought it was clearer and more interesting in the way it was set up. The adventure, Hunt for Thessalhydra, is very interesting, and it has some really strong prose.
very fun concept. I mean, you're selling on the brand. If I came here for Stranger Things, this is an adventure that we get fiction in how it's written up that says, hey, Mike Wheeler, the character on the show who plays the DM for everybody, Mike Wheeler wrote this, and you sort of get his notes a little bit. And again, I wish they'd really leaned into that and said more about how to run it in Mike's voice, which I think would have been perfect. And you get some of that, but it's not really guidance. It's more like flavor. And if it had been guidance, I think it really would have nailed it. It's fairly linear and simple, go into this cave network, then do this thing, then this other cave network. What's interesting is on D&D Beyond, it actually reads a lot better because the physical form, something about the way it's laid out and formatted, I find to be confusing, and my son felt the same way. He was like, I'd rather run Lost Mine, just the way it's laid out. And again, there's just a lack of guidance given, which makes it hard. And some of the encounters are hard for level PCs who may not know what to do around pacing. It sort of feels like you need to do it all quickly. But those encounters and what you're fighting adds up. At the end, you do get to fight a Demogorgon like in the series, though it's not at all hard the way that it is in the movie, or show, which may be a disconnect. And then you fight a Thessal Hydra at the end, which is kind of fun.
Nice.
So I'd say it's okay, but it's not what I would have loved to have seen to leverage that Stranger Things connection.
Yeah. Okay. Another suggested starting point would be the Adventurers League intro adventures. And I'm going to start with the con here. The con of that is that Adventurers League comes with red tape. It comes with all the rules that are specific to the Adventurers League.
And I gotta just quickly say, it doesn't have to, right? Because realistically, I can grab one of these intro adventures and like anything on a shelf in a gaming store, I can run it, but it doesn't feel that way. I didn't want to say that.
No, it's true, because the first 2 or 3 pages of Adventurers League adventures, well, it's now down to 1 page, but it gives all of this background about the rules and how you need to, run it to be an Adventurers League adventure and the special rules around it. So, you can run it without that. And if you're going to run for new players, even if they're going to play under Adventurers League rules, talk about Adventurers League as little as possible and focus on the game as much as possible. Because I cannot tell you how many times I've seen new players come to a table with an Adventurers League DM, and it's a great DM. They're very excited. They're masters at running games, but they spend too much time talking about the Adventurers League stuff, and sometimes because they're so excited about it, sometimes because they don't like it, but it always overshadows the actual game.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
If you do pick up one of these to run, just remember that. Don't worry about the Adventurers League stuff at the time with new players. Just get them into the game.
And I believe the newer adventures are moving the rules to the back of the adventure rather than to the front, which I don't know that I can claim credit for it, but I know that I did it. I had not seen it when I did it in Cloud Giant's Bargain, and that was much better because you just start with an adventure. If you want to know about the Adventurers League, you go to the appendix and you look up that info, right? And that works a lot better. So DMs who are running AL, just skip those first pages. You don't need them. Get to the adventure.
Yep. Now, all of these, or I should say most of these adventures, are at the start of every new Adventurers League season. And they're between like 3 to 5 short 1 hour to 1.5 hour adventures that are generally self-contained. So you don't need to know a big ongoing story. You can just sit down. They're pretty easy to prep on short notice. There's generally less material to worry about. So that's one of the pros of this, is it's not a lot of investment in terms of having to read a whole adventure to know what's going on. You can generally just read each 1 to 2 page short adventure and get the feel for it.
Yeah, I love the structure of most of the seasons where if you look up any season, right? So we're talking about the hardback books. You look up, the Tyranny of Dragons season. You look up the Princes of Elemental Evil. Any of these, the first adventure in that series that you find on the DM's Guild, which will have a 01 on it. It will almost always be, not always, but the vast majority of them are sort of a set of 5 or so really short adventures. And they're great. And I think for many of us, the gold standard is Defiance and Flan, which Shawn wrote. You've talked about this on the Encoded Design website of what and even on the show of what you set out to do with it. And you just really nailed it. And what it does is it gives you different tastes of the different pillars of play, varied experiences that you can have, and all in a very short format that as a DM, if I'm just going to give people a taste of D&D or try it out with my group, I can just use this. Some of them can even run in 30 minutes, but 30 minutes to an hour experience, very focused, easy to run, don't have too much going on, yet it's open play. Like it feels very open and there's breathing room in it. And it's great fun. The same is true of Treasures of the Broken Horde, and really all the other intros are good too. It's just, I think those two in particular for me really provide great examples of play, or even Ice Road Trackers, which you wrote for the current season of the Rime of the Frost Maiden. I think that one also has, really nice experiences that a lot of judges just love, or DMs, I should say. The Adventures League DMs love running over and over again.
Yeah, I saw a tweet from Thomas Valley, who runs games, or he runs conventions down in Florida, as well as associated with some of them in Wisconsin. And he basically said, "Hey, AL, we need more of these."
Yeah.
They're very easy for a convention organizer to get DMs for. If you're running one every hour, you don't have to force someone to miss, some sort of session or panel that they want to go to for 4 hours when they can just do it in an hour. A couple more cons of these. The ones that I wrote, and so, up to season 10, basically, weren't written necessarily to teach DMs how to DM. It doesn't say, here's how initiative works. It doesn't do all that stuff, because the understanding is Adventures League DMs will probably know what they're doing, or, at least be willing to put in some work to get up to speed. So they don't step you through things. The only, the one that does that is not one that was written by me, but it was written by, Ben Heisler and
Paige Laitman,
which is 10-1.
Mm-hmm.
That one,
the Frozen North.
The Frozen North. It's linear, so you have to play the first one, then you play the second one, then you play the third one. But they are short 1 hour things, and they do actually take the time to do a little bit of teaching along with DMs. And the last con for these Adventures League intro adventures is they don't necessarily have a bigger story behind them. Many of them were just written without knowledge of what the Adventures League series that followed would be. They were just sort of setting up a theme, or setting up a tone, or setting up a location. So you can't get just those 5 1 hour adventures and have like a level 1 to 20 story behind it.
Sure.
You would have to either play the season that's behind it or create your own stuff from there.
What I love about this short format is, I would often run these in game stores. Like I would travel for work to some place. And so I'd end up in, Houston, Texas, or Cleveland, or wherever. And I'd find a gaming store and be like, are you running Adventures League? No. Do you want to? Sure. Okay. How about I show up? I'll run it on Wednesday. And I would, break out one of these, and I would just run for a few players through 30 minutes to an hour. And they would almost say, can we play another one right now? And that's exactly what you want, right? You want that. Yes, we can, right? Yep.
And then, tell them, hey, if you like this, there's a whole season that's similar, or that continues the story.
Yeah, that's when you tell them about the Adventures League, right? Yeah,
exactly. Only then do you then say, okay, well, go to this website, and it tells you the rules on how to level your character and so on.
Yeah, and there's a hardback book that provides the greater experience too. And
exactly. Then they're hooked. Then they are ready to learn a little more about some of the red tape or bureaucracy that's involved in the Adventurers League, and they're willing to do it to continue this experience. So we've talked about some different things. So next time what we're going to do is talk about what we would love to see in an ideal introductory adventure. Talk about some pitfalls for these adventures, as well as pitfalls when you're running games for new gamers. And we will continue the series next week and probably a little bit beyond. So
awesome.
Thank you all so much for listening. You can become a patron of our show by going to patreon.com/MMP. And thank you to those of you who are already patrons. Teos, social media and you. Give me the highlights.
Well, we began with a gentle candlelight dinner. Oh, you can find me at AlphaStream on Twitter. My blog, alphastream.org. My latest deals with flowcharts and whether they are the secret that makes an adventure wonderful.
I have a feeling that I know the answer to that.
You might. Shawn, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Shawn Merwin. You can follow the podcast's Twitter at MasteringDND, or you can talk to us on the Misdirected Mark forums at forums.misdirectedmark.com. Mastering Dungeons is a Misdirected Mark production. Hey, Teos, so what are we going to do now?
We're going to kill some monsters, but with lots of DM guidance, so we know exactly what we're doing, and the players have an awesome time.
That sounds like something we should talk about next week.
Excellent.